And welcome once again to another episode of the Horizon Roundtable. Today is a very special day. Or special as in, whatever special means to you. Today, I have with me a collection of fans from around the Horizon League in what we call the first ever Horizon Roundtable Fan Battle Royale. I know it sounds more interesting than it probably actually will be. But again, I am your host. I'm Bob McDonald, and I am on Twitter at Bob McDonald. Unfortunately, today, my co-host Jimmy Lemke is unfortunately unable to join us. But as I mentioned, I have representatives from fans from every other school except, as it turns out, IUPUI. So sorry, guys. Yeah, not for lack of trying. So what I want to go ahead and do here is I want to let everybody introduce themselves, with the noted exception of John Durda from Cleveland State. At the moment, he is having some technical difficulties, but I know he'll be in at some point in time. So moving on down the line, then I want to start with Detroit Mercy.
Wonderful. Carrick Jones, Detroit Mercy, class of 2016.
All right. And and also feel free to put in your Twitter handle or anything else if you so choose to do so.
You can find me on Twitter at Carrick_Jones.
All right. Next up, Green Bay, Brian.
What's up, guys? I'm Brian Dickman. You can find me on Twitter at Brian Dickman. I also do at Fear the Phoenix. Been following Green Bay basketball since 2007 and writing Fear the Phoenix since 2011.
Okay. John, have you fixed your technical difficulties yet? No, it does not appear so. Next. Milwaukee, Chad.
I'm Chad Knodel. You can find me on Twitter at MKE_agitator. I've been following Milwaukee basketball since approximately 1999, so I'm glad to fill in for Jimmy today.
All right. Next up, Northern Kentucky, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Hart. You can find me at Chris Hart 1992 or on my website Norse Report, which is at Norse Report. And I've been an NKU fan since I moved here in 2003.
Okay. Next up, Oakland, Matt.
Hey, I'm Matt Dudek. I am Grizz Talk OU and been following OU basketball since 2004.
Great. All right. Next up, Olyer.
Oh, that was pretty good. I'm Olyer Anderson. My Twitter handle is FlamesMania, UIC grad and fan.
Okay. And, at the moment, Wright State, Ricky.
Yeah, Ricky Redinger. You can follow me on Twitter at R_Redinger4. I've been a Wright State fan since about the late 90s, probably I think like 97, 98 is my first knowledge of games. So I've been following these guys for a little while.
All right. You do not hear a Youngstown State person, but Nick is somewhere floating around. He will join us sooner rather than later. All right. So, as I mentioned, this is an open fan forum, but I will mention that I do have a certain set of topics, but I am also very realistic that this conversation will get off the rails at some point in time. It's just a matter of when. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, and Carrick, you're going to enjoy this because this involves Detroit Mercy. It also makes me look like a complete idiot because I thought last week there was no chance on the planet that Detroit Mercy was going to get rid of Bacari Alexander, and literally 3 hours after the podcast was posted, Bacari Alexander is no longer the head coach at Detroit Mercy. So, which leads me to the first question is, so what do we envision for a post-Bacari Alexander Detroit?
Well, if they hired JJ, which I fully expect them to do, let's go a dumbed-down version of Miami football in the 80s is probably what you're getting. There's going to be more than likely some improprieties and a lot of winning, hopefully, or no improprieties and a lot of losing. But it's going to be interesting situation, and I'm using my words very closely because I know for a fact I will get a phone call after this is posted from one Jermaine Jackson if I speak out of turn. So it's going to be interesting, to say the least.
Sounds like fun. Personally, I was hoping for another wild Gary Waters to Detroit rumor, but doesn't sound like it this year.
No, I think it's pretty much JJ or bust. I can't think of anybody else that they would probably even go and interview. Maybe the guy from Ferris State keeps coming up. A lot of our alumni that are very involved really like him. Outside of that, there's 2 or 3 local high school coaches that are pretty big time. But when you have a guy already working in the building that's the interim head coach that kind of can decide if half your roster leaves or not, if you're Robert Vowles, you really don't have much of a choice. I mean, you really want to dig the hole even deeper and see where that goes. Granted, they're not very
well. They unless you find another rock lair, I don't know how much lower you can go.
It's the thing that's scary is I don't even think he's a bad coach, and I like him. He's a nice guy. He's real good to one of my very good friends, Carlton Brundage. But he doesn't have a lot of head coaching experience, and if you ask high school basketball coaches in Michigan, it's very polarizing. They either hate him, or they love him, or he's a dirty, rotten cheater. Those are about your 3 different ways of opinion you're going to get on him. So, I'm cautiously optimistic. Kevin Durant really likes him. So I guess if that's a good vote of confidence, a lot of NBA players really like him. That's all you ever see on the social media is posts of him with NBA players and whatnot, and them talking about him. So that's something, but I mean, I don't necessarily think that.
Well, let me ask you this, and I actually pose this to both you and Matt, because there's been and obviously between Detroit and Oakland, and that whole entire Detroit area high school basketball scene, you see a lot of. I know in the last few years you've seen a lot of Horizon League players come out of that. I can tell you right now, I mean, Dennis Felton just pulled 3 guys out of the Detroit area already. So between that and everybody else within mid-majors that are looking, where does this kind of state of flux in Detroit? And I pose this to you as well, Matt, over at Oakland. What does that mean to you guys?
Well, here's the thing from the Oakland perspective. I used to enjoy watching Mercy lose because we have that rivalry. It's not even fun right now. But with that in mind, and I'm not even just talking crap, hiring Jermaine Jackson would be the worst thing I think that university could do. He couldn't run a clean program in the high school lines. I don't know how he's going to run a clean program at college. His son having to have all those minutes already ran off their best player who's transferring, Corey Allen. I mean, they're losing commits left and right. I think hiring Jermaine Jackson is a terrible idea. I think it's what settled Bacari Alexander with a bad place to go. Is I think he was kind of saddled with JJ anyway when he came in. There's been rumors of that. It was never confirmed, but I think he had to have JJ on his staff, and I think it was bad for him to begin with. The name that I saw just today, Tony Paul tweeted it out, was Rick Mahorn's apparently interested, which would at least be kind of a name, and for the Detroit area might mean something. He's not he does radio sometimes for Pistons games. You can catch him, and I think he's awful, but it might be a name at least to help Detroit turn that around.
I find it interesting, yeah, and in terms of, and I open this up to the group, in terms of it, I guess I can't understate the importance of having those Detroit area teams, for lack of a better word, not suck. I mean, you saw it this year where the bottom half of the Horizon League just, really was not great. And I guess I got to ask, if you're looking at another major rebuild job in Detroit, I mean, where does that put the state of the conference as it relates to, kind of those bottom teams?
Can I jump in? This is
Sure.
This is Olier. I think that, from looking in from a distance, that what could be, they should just blow it up. I mean, JJ is not gonna help. What did he do in the games that Bacari was missing? Was there a change in philosophy? Was there anything different?
The team played better, I thought.
They were 4-3, but what was the big difference? They were 4-3. I mean, so that was the culture any different? Say again.
Philosophy, but I think the kids played with more heart. That's the thing. I don't think Bacari could get anybody to play with any heart. I agree with Matt that it's probably not a very good idea, but as a university, our hands are kind of tied here. We don't have a whole lot of money. We probably just had to pay Bacari half of his buyout. I'm going to go ahead and assume that his inappropriate comments probably lost him some money on that, knowing how good the university's lawyers are.
But time out, before you, one other thing I gotta ask: did he? I saw the words. I saw the figure $400,000 a year. Is that a real number for him?
No, I think it's around 2 something.
Oh, thank God, because I was losing my mind last week thinking $400,000 a year. Really?
I mean,
No.
You'll never know for 3 or 4 years because everything's private, and then you got the tax documents, and it's a whole
probably.
fiasco. I think the thing you're going to see if Detroit gets better is you're probably not going to see those kids leaking out to Cleveland State and Youngstown State anymore. Then again, where Dennis Felton's recruiting is probably places that U of D and Oakland aren't going to necessarily recruit. He's really recruiting the charter schools, and half the charter school kids can't qualify at U of D. You look at Detroit charter schools, almost all of them are failing. Edison was really good this year, but I know one of their best kids couldn't get into any Power 5 schools because of how bad the school is.
I can't believe I'm going to agree with Kirky here, but he's absolutely right. There's a reason that U of D and Oakland aren't going after a lot of these Detroit kids between grades, and the Detroit basketball system is not what it was even a couple of years ago. It's deteriorating terribly. So there's a reason that they're not being heavily recruited by our schools right now.
Yeah, the public school league let in all these charter schools, and it's just not the same. It's not like, the year Kay Felder came out. You had from 2010 through 14, 4 years of really good basketball in the city. It's not like that. I mean, nothing against Clarkston, but you watched, 5 white kids beat the hell out of everybody for the past 2 years, and it could have been 4 years. And, these are the best kids in Michigan, and they're not even in the top 100 at all.
Well,
Okay.
that's the problem you guys have in Detroit, is your academics. Our problem with us not recruiting at UIC, not recruiting public leaguers is the AAU. That's the problem there, because a lot of the public league coaches, they run the AAU teams, and they have some kind of level of, it's almost like the Nike shoe companies.
Right.
And so a lot of the coaches don't want to deal with that. So that's one reason why a lot of why UIC and some other even P5 schools don't even recruit the Chicago area like they used to, because of the AAU coaches. So that's our problem with the public league here.
In Michigan, we have a rule where the coaches can't coach the same age of travel as they do at high school. So you don't see that. Unfortunately, if I did it, I'd do it with soccer. But it's unfortunate. I think that the longer Detroit's bad, it's bad for the league, because when Detroit was good, it was good for the ratings. I mean, we had a good rivalry going with Cleveland State there. It was good rivalry with Butler, good rivalry with Valpo. But at the same time, we have a huge empty arena that nobody was showing up to watch that this year. Nobody was showing up last year. It hasn't really been good. I was telling Matt this in January. It hasn't really been good since 2012. It's been dwindling. The university just not sinking money into getting people in the seats. And I mean, who wants to watch a game, even if it's good, with an empty arena on TV? There's no It's like there's no atmosphere. It's really weird.
It doesn't help that your students are terrible. They piled out. I'm not kidding. They piled out of the Oakland Detroit game at halftime. They came in. They were rowdy. Oakland came out early, and man, by the second half, Detroit was kind of back in that game. They could have used their students. I probably watched 400 kids leave at halftime.
Yeah, no, that's how it's been since about 2012. It's been a change in Greek life, a change in everywhere. I mean, I was the president in 2015 and in 2016, and the kids coming into school now, at least going to U of D, are so focused on like their program and academics and either not having a social life or so focused in their frat that they could realistically care less what's going on, and it's really filtered down into basketball. I mean, even when we were good, it wasn't crazy. But there was still 100 people at every game. Now, I mean, how many times have you gone and seen no students?
So, all right. So, and I know I keep pounding in the whole Detroit thing, but this is kind of moving on topics. The one thing I did want to talk about, it involves all of us, and it's Motor City Madness. We have the deal with the Horizon League, and Olympia is for 5 years. There's an out clause after year 3. So what exactly, where does the league go from here? Because let's be honest, I look at it from a standpoint of, Olympia put this together. They threw all this money at it, and for lack of a better word, they're looking for bigger and brighter. They're probably doing this as kind of a dress rehearsal to something bigger, like, for example, hosting a Big Ten tournament.
Sure. It's inevitable, but I think. And they probably don't have the time or choose not to take the time to wait on the horizon, but it's a new venture. I mean, I'm pretty sure, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that Arch Madness didn't take off right away after 2 or 3 years. It took some time to build. You got to get your teams right. So the attendance has gone up each and every year, although incremental. But I think if they give it some time, there has been a changeover in coaches and an increase in talent across the league, in my perspective. So I think if they just give it some time, and I think it'll be okay. It may not be like Arch Madness, may not be as big as, of course, the Big Ten that they want there, but given some time and the improvement of the teams, I think it'll be okay. I think it'll be fine. Give it some time, which they probably don't have.
Yeah, and I think with that out clause after year 3, I think that's kind of the issue, because Olympia can revisit it and say, I mean, we put all this money in. We're year 3, and they're probably having that same conversation within the halls of Little Caesars Arena right now. And, it's only, we're looking at it from a standpoint of it's only a matter of time. Now, my other question to you, and I actually kind of pose this not necessarily to those within the, that are in close proximity, but for those out in the Wisconsin area, the Green Bays and the Milwaukees of the world, this is, in terms of this tournament being where it is, and I know that this has come up a couple of times in our previous podcast. What is kind of your standpoint from that perspective? Because obviously the Wisconsin schools are further away than any of the other schools. So,
Brian, you can go first.
I personally don't mind the neutral site idea. I don't even mind Detroit as a location. I think the problem is having that Tuesday championship game, which we're probably locked into because of ESPN. Mm-hmm. So I think if there's flexibility to move the dates, I think a neutral site would work better. But if we're locked into that Tuesday, I personally would rather go back to campus sites to ensure we have full arenas that looks better for TV. That's just
what about that? That first round of campus sites? Because I know long ago not even 4 or 5 years ago, the setup was the first rounds that 6 through 10, They hosted at the campus sites, I'm sorry, take that back. It was 4 through 10 or something like that. They hosted at the campus sites, and then the format's changed so many times, I've lost count, honestly.
Yeah, and with Detroit, I guess, the Horizon League has said that the attendance has improved for those first-round games compared to when they were played on campus, and those games were usually very lightly attended because oftentimes there's quick turnaround, because seating's not always locked up, so you don't know if you're going to be hosting that game or who you're going to be playing. So, it does make sense that way, but I'm talking more like the semifinals and the finals. I liked it with, the full arenas. I grew up in the Milwaukee area. I remember going to those, those games at the arena against Butler and UIC. And I was at that game that Milwaukee beat Green Bay. I'll never, ever forget that game in 2014. And, those are just amazing atmospheres, and it's a shame we don't get those anymore.
So say for example, if Olympia decides we're done, we're gonna pursue other opportunities, where does that leave the Horizon League tournament? Does it end up in Indianapolis? Because I can't see it happening. I can't see it being hosted by the school, the top seed again. I just can't see it.
I think they should maybe go if all else fails. What's wrong with going back to the way it was originally before that Loyola UIC game in Cleveland State? That's really what changed everything.
It did. You're absolutely right.
Schools would have to bid on hosting the tournament, and for a while there, I thought it was great. I remember when UIC hosted it, and Detroit had when they had Rashad Phillips. I mean, I was there. I enjoyed the tournaments. I stayed for all the games. And I thought it was very enjoyable. Like I said, that Cleveland State, when the game was held there, that changed everything.
It did. You're absolutely right. Because not only did the way the venues were selected changed, but the entire format changed. The double bye came in.
Exactly.
The highest seed. The house of the highest seed came in. I mean, all of those formats changed, all because we had two Chicago schools, battling in Cleveland.
About 100 fans showed up there. It was
It
was on national TV. It was a great game, but nobody saw it except the people that was watching ESPN at the time.
I remember it vividly.
Yeah,
I remember going to the Cleveland State Detroit game right in the first round. It was like the last. And they, oh crud, was it? Yeah, it was the 01-02 game, and I think the last thing I remember is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Mercy pep banders got into it with like Theo Dixon or something. That's the only thing I can remember from that. Or no, or was it? I think it might have been one of the Detroit players got into it with Cleveland State's pep band. I can't remember I'm sure the legend is bigger than the story, and as they always say, when the legend is bigger, print the legend.
Right.
So, but yeah, you're absolutely right. That whole thing with Butler losing that first round game in Cleveland, and that's when everything just kind of turned on its ear, and now we're and it seems like they've spent so many years just trying to figure something out,
trying to protect the number one seed, and they've, in all actuality, the league has done what they're supposed to do in protecting the number one. The number one seed just hasn't come through. I mean, I don't think
3 years in a row.
And I don't think we'd be having this conversation about changing the venues or anything about the tournament if Oakland had did what they were supposed to do. NKU had, if anybody that was number one or even number two had done what they were supposed to do, I don't think we'd be having this conversation.
And especially when the last 2 years, the number one seed has gotten knocked out by a 9 seed.
Exactly.
If we're so worried about protecting the 1 seed, though, why don't we just go to the Ivy League format and just put them in? Like, I'm sick of hearing about protecting the 1. They've had every advantage, and that includes my school 2 years ago. We had every advantage, and we didn't do our job. So, why are we so worried about protecting them? I don't want to be a small-time league and go back to campus sites. Put it in a neutral site. as fans, let's show up and let's support the league.
I agree. But I think also now, since they've added the women, I don't want to come up as sounding sexist here. I don't think that has helped, because now you have so many games, and you have the added days, as someone alluded to before, and that Tuesday is still going to be there. But you have so many days, and the women added. I think the women should have their own venue, their own tournament. Keep them in. Try to have it as compact as possible, with as few days as possible, as many games as you can get in, and let's go from there. So
I think what happened is, in that case, I think what the Horizon League tried to do with that is they tried to replicate what the MAC did in Cleveland with MAC Madness, because they do all of those things. The problem that they had, that the Horizon League has, is they kind of they compress the schedule, and more to the point, and this is also goes back to that first round of games. All the first round games for the MAC tournament, I believe, are both men and women are hosted at campus sites.
You are correct.
And I think that is probably, I think that's where it's just to your point earlier, it's too much too soon. And it's one of those things where it's too many, it's too busy. So, and I guess the other thing is, if we're looking at the women's tournament, if we go back to the number 1 seed, Green Bay would host it every year.
Well, which is fine, because they should host it every year until someone topples them.
Which they probably won't. I mean, the Green Bay has built a dynasty up in women's basketball. Dynasty.
Why hasn't the University of Wisconsin, like the major one, told Green Bay they need to pull their women's team from this conference if they win like they do? Like, if I'm thinking revenue, I'd be trying to put them in another conference. I don't understand what's going on.
Don't know.
I mean, isn't that that's your revenue generating sport, right?
I mean, the attendance for women's games is pretty close to the men's games, but I still think the men's generates more revenue than the women's team does.
Yeah. So, and so one of the things that I was also looking at, since, as I'm sure some of you saw going prior to the start of the podcast, looks like Xavier has found a new coach in Travis Steele, and it got me thinking a little bit, about the coaches within the league. Specifically, I think of John Brannen at Northern Kentucky and Scott Nagy over at Wright State. You have two coaches. Especially with John Brannen, he's really built that team. He's led the team to an NCAA tournament in the first year of their eligibility as a D1 team. Scott Nagy came in, and he was able to get his team into the tournament this year. As is always the case with mid-major programs, there's always that specter in the back of the room of, where do you see a moment in time, maybe not this year, but potentially next year, where a John Brannen or a Scott Nagy might be looking to seek life elsewhere?
I would definitely say that Coach Brannen, he's going to be out in the next few years. I mean, I know he's been interviewing for jobs this offseason already.
Middle Tennessee State, I believe they ran a story saying he was one of the finalists.
Yeah, and I had heard a rumor that he had actually turned it down. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Because when I told Jimmy that last week, he was like, he did not. I'm like, yeah, he did.
Yeah, and I know just from the other things I've heard is that he has some feelers out at other universities, but it seems like most of the ones that are open now, I wouldn't think he would go to, but I could be wrong.
I thought it was just due diligence just to see what was going on, because he's got family there, and he's building a program And I do believe that he probably will leave in the next few years or so, which will be good actually, because that means that he has turned their program around, and it will be a desirable job. So the next coach that'll be there, it'll probably be a good coach as well. So I'm not all hung up on coaches if they leave, as long as they've done a good job and lifting a program and leaving it better than they found it.
And that's one other question that's actually one other question I want to pose, because I think we can all objectively agree that the nature of the mid-major coaches, you get there, and if you're successful, you're on to bigger and better things. That's just the nature of mid-major coaches in general. My question has always been, is the question of the order of succession. Like, for example, when Bryce Drew left Valpo, one of their assistants was next man up. Do you see a scenario? Would you ever see a scenario where any of the other Horizon League schools would be in that situation, where you had say, for example, a John Brannen did end up going to a Power 5 school? Is there an infrastructure in place where there's some consistency there, and an assistant coach has been there for a while, and he'd get first dibs, for lack of a better term?
Well, I think I'll step in here real quick on this one, because this was a hot topic for me. For you guys who follow me on Twitter, I was pretty upset when Wright State fired Billy Donlin. It was the same exact thing. Donlin
absolutely
was
inexplicable.
I mean, he was. You had Brad Burnell, who came in, got Wright State to the tournament in his second year. Brad Burnell left, went to Clemson. Within days, they hired Billy Donlin as top assistant. And my first thing that comes to mind is the Butler pipeline that they had going for so long, and I thought it was fantastic. So that's where that went going for me. Now, you start to look, obviously, Nagy's getting talked about. I think it has to be the right job for him now, because he's got a good wealth of talent coming back the next couple years. But I think it's the same thing. Hopefully they can develop somebody. But I see that hopefully being a potential thing for Wright State.
And do you see that? Do any of you see that happening at potentially some of your other schools?
Not at mine.
Besides you, Chad.
Yeah.
You know what? At Oakland, I kind of do, because someday we do have to figure out what life after Campy is going to be, and I think the answer is going to be within the pipeline, but they're not at OU right now. It's either going to be Drew Valentine, who's at Loyola Chicago, or Sadi Washington, who's at Michigan, which is interesting because they're playing each other today. But I think it's going to be one of those two. They're both longtime OU people that have gone off and are kind of doing their thing. But I think, and then the next 4 or 5 years, whenever Campy decides that he's done, and I've had my issues with Campy, but at the same time I respect him. He gets to leave on his terms as far as I'm concerned, and I think he's going to get that. But when he decides it's that time, I think it's going to be one of those two guys that comes in for OU.
Okay.
Now that adds a different spin to it now, because I'm not really all that crazy about the succession of the pipeline that's right there on your bench. But in those cases, I think if an assistant goes someplace else and maybe gets some other teaching and philosophies, like you Drew Valentine's and the other guy that went off, they're getting exposed to some other type of coaching. Now, when they come back, they may bring a different style or a different type or an addition to where they have, because Campy, you know what he is, what he is. You know what his system is. You know what his style is.
That's so true.
So if they have ties to the university, and if they go someplace else and get some other type of teaching, I think that would be great. Because here, like at UIC, yes, people are looking at D Brown, but D Brown, in the back of his mind, he wants to go back to Illinois at some point and be either the head coach there. So we're not looking, unless he gets the head coaching position sometime soon at UIC, I don't think the succession would be there. But in those two cases, when you talk about at Oakland, I can see that going someplace else and then coming back. That would be better.
Speaking of UIC, because I was going to have to ask about this, Dikembe Dixon, him leaving. Where does in terms of Dikembe Dixon leaving, where does that leave UIC?
Better. I'm sorry, did I say that? You know, Dick. Hey,
can you elaborate?
Dixon he's a good player, but Dixon of this season was not the Dixon of his freshman year. And in my opinion, it seemed that he regressed. I don't know what happened. You know, when you have injuries like he had, you know, you saw it with D Rose. It seems like it's a mental thing that some players they never fully recover from, or it takes them a lot longer than a year or even two to kind of come back from. It seems like that ACL injury, it affected his hands. He couldn't hold on to the ball, and it was just I don't know who that player was. You know, and his first year when he was shooting the ball, because we didn't have a whole lot of help, a lot of these players and analysts got in his head talking about the NBA, and he had scouts coming to the games. And you know, and for a young man like that whose dreams are to be in the NBA, that stuff kind of gets into your head, and you really think sometimes that you are what you're really not. Not saying that he can't make a living overseas, but you know, I wish him well. But most of the time when Dixon was not in the game, the ball moved better. The defense was much better because he really didn't have a one-on-one defensive game like some of the other players did. But you saw it when he left. I mean, we won 3 games in the CIT. The ball moved. You know, so I wish him well. But the team we have now, I think it'll be better next year if Coach McClain can get his act together and establish some type of offensive system.
I also got the one thing I do want to ask about too, with related to Dixon is that I don't know if you've noticed, but he during the season he was quite active on social media.
You're talking about off season, going back and forth,
and
how great he was.
I mean, was that a distraction? I mean,
not really. The players knew how this guy was. You know, as a matter of fact, even before he made the announcement about him taking his talents elsewhere, the team knew about it. The problem was the timing of it all. So they know how Dixon is. They knew how he was during the regular season. They knew how he was in the off season when he was going back and forth with the other people on Twitter talking about how great he was. Nobody could guard him and all of this. You know, and I understand that. Yeah, every player wants to believe that about himself, and that's great. You're just coming off freshman of the year in the Horizon League, and you thinking you're this. And granted, I'll give him that. Confidence is a mother. But to go out now, you have to go out and prove it. And this past season, he did not. Granted, he averaged about 14 points a game, tied for top scoring honors with Adi, but Dixon just wasn't the Dikembe Dixon that he probably thought he was. Good player, but like I said, wish him best, but I don't know. It just wasn't.
I only ask because if I'm not mistaken, at least a couple of you on this particular podcast happen to have conversations with Dikembe over the past season.
That's true.
Was that the guy in Michigan? Was that the guy in Michigan?
Matt, care to elaborate?
Me and Dikembe are good. I'm a big fan of his. I enjoy his banter. I wish him well. I wish he was on my team in a lot of ways. I know me and Chad got into it over Dikembe Dixon because I'm not a big fan of tweeting players directly. I will talk about players because if they're on there and they want to see it, whatever. But I'm not a big fan of tagging them into stuff. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure I'm still blocked from MKE Agitator.
Yep, you are.
Well, as long as we got that. I can't. How many? I had at least one Cleveland State person. I think it was. Oh crap! What was it? And John, I know you're still in the chat because your microphone still sucks. What was it? Hugh Thorpe. I know him and Dikembe got into it too, and I'm like, oh, dude, seriously.
I gotta defend myself here. I didn't get into it with Dikembe Dixon.
John, I don't care if she was only 15. He still got into it with him. I know it's it was a weird. Just anytime I saw back and forth, I'm like, okay, here we go.
All I did was quote his tweet when he said he was leaving,
Yeah.
and said that he should sit the bench for the rest of the year. That's all I said, and then he answered me.
Ironically, actually your wish is granted because he didn't play in the CIT.
Well, I didn't want him to play against us in the tournament, but it didn't wind up mattering, so it was okay.
There you go. Problem solved.
Yeah.
So
he and I are fine. We're not at odds.
There you go. No, I wish Dikembe well. I honestly wish he'd have been around for another season, but it is what it is. I think I know he had the injuries sophomore his second year, and I hope that that was going to be a little bit more of a thing that he was able to do. But that actually brings me up to another point. As fans, when you look at interaction, because of social media, and you look at the fan interaction with players, I mean, where do you guys stand on that? I mean, the Dikembe Dixon thing aside, where do you kind of stand on that? And I say this as somebody who has who because of my previous because of the podcast, because of the writing I've done over the years, have players following me, had at least one tell me to shut the fuck up at least once. That was earlier this year because apparently I suck at spelling people's names. Where do you guys stand on that?
Well, let me start with this real quick because we have a running count in the Right State group. I have over 35 Horizon League basketball players that have blocked me on Twitter.
35.
I'm 25 now, so I'm a little too old for it. But back in the early 20s, we would get all the information, and we would be tweeting at players during the game as we would know stuff. So we actually, when we had the Youngstown State incident, when Lucas Podolsky attempted to come off the bench and fight us, their entire team and program blocked us on Twitter. So they had to move on from that. So as far as that, I think you're a target, and hey, if you're gonna put it out there, comes with the territory.
No.
There you go.
I think it's with what we do. I mean, it's not like I don't know how many are on here are real reporters. Bob, you may be, but others like we just run blogs and message boards like myself. So and we have opinions. And I put the first year that the Kimmy got injured, his second year, in 10 games into his second season, he got injured. And I posted on Flames Mania that sometimes we put out titles just to get viewers and get readers. And the title of the article that I wrote was Blessing in Disguise. And without reading it, Coach McClain inboxed me about said that I crushed a young man and what have you. I said, first of all, I didn't even say that it was a blessing. You used that, and it was a question mark because someone may have mentioned that. In other words, was it a blessing in disguise? It was just to draw in the readers. And I gave kudos to Dixon and what have you. And I did mention that once he was out, the team stepped up. They played better ball. They played team ball. Not a knock against him. It's just that the next man up philosophy kicked in, and they all played better. So sometimes when you have followers, players who are followers, or if you follow them, it's almost as if you have to be careful what you say because it can be misconstrued. Just like texting, nobody can hear the tenor of your voice. Nobody can see your face. So they're just reading words. And a lot of times they put their own spin on what they're reading. So it's a thin line. And, that's why sometimes I try and talk or post in generalities instead of specifics. Because a lot of these people, first of all, they're young, they're naive, they're reactionary. Yeah. They don't think things through. So you have to be careful with that sometimes.
Yeah. No. I having been in your situation up until this last March, just between my column and More Than a Fan and Cleveland and Campus Press Box. First of all, I made absolutely no illusions that I'm anything other than an opinionated loudmouth. But to your point, I always tried to be mindful of, putting a torch to anything. Didn't always follow that. But it was always something in the back of my mind. It always didn't work all the time, but knowing that. But I'm interested in hearing some of your some of the other folks, your opinions on that, because I know Chris, you run North Report, and Brian, you run Fear the Phoenix. I mean, from your standpoint, doing those things, where is your interaction? What is your standpoint on that?
If it's okay, I'll go ahead and jump in first. Sure. So I think my main philosophy has always been not to diss anybody or be too critical necessarily, just because I am trying to cultivate relationships with some of these people so that, I can we're trying to, start podcasts and get some of these guys on to talk with us. Mm-hmm. And so I don't really want to tick them off, especially at least on the NKU side. In terms of other teams, players, maybe we're not so opposed to doing that. But at least for NKU players, we're really trying to stay positive. I know I've had a conversation with Coach Brannen before, in the elevator on campus, and just always trying to be really positive with those guys and be promoters of the university. But yeah, in terms of other teams' fans, I could care less.
No.
I love that. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Hey, there you go. Hey, yeah.